I never believed my father's death would become the secret that nearly destroyed us all. For 20 years, I carried the memory of that night like a scar that had faded but never healed. I thought the pain was gone, that I had moved on. My name is Hannah. Daughter. Sister. And the one who truly believed that the worst day of her life was already behind her. I spent years trying to make peace with the past, visiting his grave, telling myself he was really gone. Our family spoke of him less and less, until silence became our way of surviving. But then, one quiet evening, my aunt called me over. She said she needed to tell me something about that night. And when she finally spoke, everything I believed about my dad, my family, and the night he died, came crashing down. My name is Hannah. I'm in my early 30s now, but for most of my life, I've carried one story, the story of how my father died when I was 15. It was sudden. It was painful. It was supposed to be the truth. At least, that's what everyone told me. Before that night, my life felt ordinary, in the best way possible. My dad, Mark, was the kind of man everyone liked. He coached my brother Tom's soccer team on weekends, grilled burgers in the backyard every Sunday, and always called me Pumpkin. He wasn't fancy or rich, he just showed up. Every time. Mom, Linda, was caring but always anxious. She worried about small things, my grades, the laundry, whether the milk was fresh. She used to say, if I stop worrying, who will, and laugh. Dad would kiss her cheek and tell her to relax. She'd roll her eyes, but she loved it. You could see it. Our house wasn't big, but it was full of noise, full of warmth, full of family. And then there was Aunt Sarah. She wasn't my real aunt, but she'd been around since before I was born. She was my mom's closest friend. I used to think of her as the fun adult, always bringing snacks, telling jokes, and helping with our school projects. She'd stay late for dinner and sometimes sleep on the couch after long talks with my parents. I didn't think much of it back then. She was just part of the family. Some evenings I can still picture it, Dad out on the porch with the grill smoking, the smell of barbecue filling the air. Tom and I running around with our soccer ball. Aunt Sarah sitting beside Mom, sipping iced tea, talking about church events and who brought the best pie last Sunday. Everything felt safe. Familiar. Simple. Dad had this way of making every little thing fun. If it rained during a picnic, he'd pull out the board games. If I failed a test, he'd shrug and say, we'll fix it together. He used to tell Tom and me bedtime stories that always ended the same way, family first, no matter what. That line stuck with me. It still does. But after he died, that saying started to sound different. It happened one night after a late drive. The police came. Mom cried so hard she couldn't breathe. I remember standing in the living room in my pajamas, watching lights flash outside. They said it was a car accident. They said it was quick. I wanted to believe that. We had a small funeral. No open casket. Aunt Sarah stayed by Mom's side the entire time, holding her hand. I remember wondering why Mom looked more tired than sad. It was as if she'd already known something I didn't. Life after that changed quietly. Mom stopped cooking as much. The smell of barbecue disappeared. Tom barely talked for weeks. And Aunt Sarah? She was around more than ever. She came over almost every night, sometimes even stayed for days. She'd tell me stories about my dad, make dinner when Mom couldn't, and say things like, he'd want us to take care of each other. It should have made me feel better. But it didn't. There were things that didn't add up. The night before Dad's funeral, I woke up to whispering in the kitchen. I recognized Aunt Sarah's voice saying, we'll keep this quiet, okay? Mom answered, but her voice was too low to hear clearly. I remember standing halfway down the stairs, listening, frozen. But I told myself they were just talking about funeral arrangements. What else could it be? As the years went on, little details started to feel strange. When people asked about how Dad died, Mom would pause, like she was searching for the right version to tell. Sometimes she'd say he fell asleep at the wheel. Other times, that a deer jumped out and he swerved. The story shifted, just slightly, every time. And Aunt Sarah, she started acting almost like a parent. She'd sign school forms, attend my soccer games, even sit next to Mom during parent-teacher meetings. At first, it was comforting. But then it became confusing. There was one Christmas when she gave me a necklace, silver, with a small heart. I thanked her and said, "It's beautiful." She smiled and said, "He would have wanted you to have it." I remember blinking and asking, "You mean Dad?" She froze for half a second, then smiled again. "Yes, your dad." I didn't think much about it back then. I didn't question why she said it that way. But now, it echoes in my head. When I left for college, Mom and Aunt Sarah threw me a small going-away dinner. Just the three of us and Tom. It was nice, but strange too. Mom barely spoke, staring at her plate. Aunt Sarah did most of the talking. I remember glancing at Mom and seeing her eyes glisten. She looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't. After that, I started noticing patterns. Aunt Sarah handled most of our family's mail. She answered calls meant for Mom. She even had a key to our house, and Mom never seemed bothered by it. Tom once joked, maybe Aunt Sarah should just move in already. Mom didn't laugh. I think that was the first time I felt something off, a gut feeling I couldn't explain. Still, I pushed it down. Because that's what we do with family. We don't ask too many questions when it hurts too much to hear the answers. Years went by. I grew up, got a job, and told myself I was over it. Dad's death was something I had learned to live with. I kept his photo on my nightstand, a picture of him laughing, sunlight on his face. Every time life got hard, I'd whisper, "Family first," like he used to say. But I guess some truths don't stay buried. Because years later, when Aunt Sarah called and said she needed to talk about that night, the night my father died, I finally understood what my gut had been trying to tell me all along. Looking back now, I realized the signs were always there. I just chose not to see them. I used to think my family was normal. Maybe even better than normal. My dad, Mark, was the kind of man who made people smile just by showing up. He was funny, always on time, and he could fix anything, from a broken bike chain to a bad day. My mom, Linda, was the calm in every storm. She baked cookies that made the whole house smell like home and made sure our small kitchen table always had space for one more person. And then, there was Aunt Sarah, though she wasn't really my aunt by blood, that's what we all called her. She'd been in our lives for as long as I could remember. When I think about it now, I realize Aunt Sarah wasn't just close to us, she was part of us. Dad used to say he met Mom at a church picnic. He spilled lemonade on her dress and spent the whole day trying to make it up to her. Aunt Sarah was there too, back then. She and Mom had grown up together, childhood friends who became like sisters. Sarah was the one who introduced them. Mom used to laugh and say, "If it wasn't for Sarah, I'd never have met your father." So in a way, our family began with her. Dad ran a small construction company. Everyone in town seemed to know him. People trusted him, Mark the builder, they called him, the man who could make anything stand tall and strong. Mom helped sometimes with paperwork, but mostly, she focused on home. Aunt Sarah worked at the local clinic and lived a few streets away. But she was always around, Sunday dinners, family barbecues, birthdays. There were so many pictures of her in our family albums, sometimes standing beside Dad more often than Mom. Back then, it didn't mean anything to me. It was just normal. I remember one Christmas, I must have been around 10. Mom made her famous chocolate pudding, and Aunt Sarah came over early to help decorate the tree. Dad was fixing the star on top, standing on a chair. Sarah held the chair steady, and when the star flickered to life, everyone clapped. Dad climbed down, smiling, and for a moment, his eyes met Sarah's. It was just a second, but even as a kid, I noticed. It wasn't weird exactly. Just quiet. Like they shared a secret joke I wasn't part of. But I brushed it off. Dad was like that with everyone, warm, friendly, caring. Family life was steady. Dad coached my brother Tom's soccer team, and Mom helped at the bake sales. Sarah was always there with extra snacks, cheering from the sidelines. Sometimes people joked, "You'd think Sarah lives here." We all laughed. At the time, I thought we were lucky. Mom used to say, "Sarah has such a special bond with our family." And I'd nod because I believed it. I believed everything back then. But as I got older, little things started to change. Dad began spending long nights in his study. He'd say he was working on business stuff, contracts, client meetings, invoices. sometimes I'd walk past and hear voices. Once, I knocked, and when he opened the door, Aunt Sarah was sitting there, looking at papers. She smiled quickly, a bit too fast. "Oh hey, sweetheart," she said. "Just helping your dad with some office things." I remember saying, "It's late, Aunt Sarah." Dad chuckled. "Deadlines don't sleep, kiddo." I shrugged and went back to bed. But I could still hear them talking softly behind the closed door. It didn't seem wrong, not then. Sarah was family. She'd always been around. Still, sometimes I'd catch Mom staring out the window while they talked, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. One day, at lunch, Mom said quietly, "You always knew how to hold things together, Hannah. Even when you were little." I didn't know what she meant, but her voice sounded tired. Aunt Sarah, on the other hand, made everything seem light. She'd take me for ice cream, or drive me to practice when Mom was too busy. I liked those rides. She made me laugh. She'd say, "You're like a sister to me." And I'd smile, thinking that was the best thing anyone could say. Still, sometimes I noticed she and Dad shared looks that were different. Not bad, just hard to describe. Familiar. One afternoon, I said jokingly, "You two are always hanging out." Aunt Sarah laughed. "Oh, your dad needs someone to keep him out of trouble." Mom smiled then, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes," she said softly, "we're lucky to have her." At the next family reunion, someone asked where Dad was. Mom glanced quickly at Sarah before answering. "Oh, he's busy with a client." I nodded and added, "Yeah, work stuff." It became a pattern. Every time someone asked, we'd say work stuff. Dad missed more dinners. More birthdays. More quiet evenings. Mom would stay up late, waiting, even when she said she wasn't. Aunt Sarah was always the one who helped fill the empty chair. Sometimes, when Dad finally came home, I'd hear their voices, low and sharp, through the thin walls. I didn't listen too hard. I didn't want to. I guess part of me already knew something wasn't right. But kids don't ask those kinds of questions. We tell ourselves it's normal. That grown-ups just have problems. That families stay strong no matter what. And ours did, at least, it looked that way from the outside. Until one night. It was raining hard, and I remember the sound of sirens somewhere far away. Mom was pacing the kitchen. Aunt Sarah was there too, whispering into the phone. I asked what was wrong, but no one answered. Hours later, a policeman came to the door. Mom's face went pale. Aunt Sarah put her arms around her, holding her so tight I thought Mom might break. They said Dad's car had gone off the road near the old quarry. They said there was nothing left to identify him except his wallet. That night, everything changed. Our house felt hollow. Quiet. Mom stopped cooking. Tom cried for days. Aunt Sarah moved in for a while to help us adjust. I thought she was saving us. But looking back now, I wonder if that was when the truth started to bury itself, deep, quiet, under all the kindness and care. Because, years later, when Aunt Sarah sat me down and said, "Hannah, there's something I need to tell you about your father," it all came rushing back. The late nights. The quiet looks. The whispered secrets. And the night I thought I lost my father for good. Looking back now, I realize the signs were always there. I just chose not to see them. I remember the day my father died like it happened this morning. It started like any other Saturday, sunny, calm, ordinary. Dad was outside trimming the hedges, and I was helping Mom set the table for lunch. Tom was chasing the dog around the yard, laughing so hard he tripped over the sprinkler. Everything felt normal. Safe. Dad called out, "Hey, Hannah, grab me a cold drink, will you?" I ran inside, grabbed a soda from the fridge, and handed it to him. He smiled, that same warm, easy smile I'd known all my life, and said, "Thanks, kiddo. You always take care of your old man." That was the last time I saw him alive. It's strange how one moment can split your life into before and after. A few hours later, I was upstairs folding laundry when I heard Mom scream. Not just a normal scream, the kind that tears through the walls and makes your stomach drop. I ran downstairs. Mom was on the floor, shaking, holding the phone. Aunt Sarah was beside her, pale and trembling, saying, "Linda, breathe. Just breathe." I kept asking what was wrong, but no one answered me. Sarah finally looked up, her face wet with tears, and whispered, "There's been an accident." That word, accident, it didn't make sense at first. Sarah said Dad's car had gone off the road near the quarry. They were still pulling the wreck out when the police called. Mom fainted right there in the kitchen. Sarah caught her before she hit the floor. The next few hours were a blur, flashing lights, a police car in our driveway, neighbors whispering outside. I remember clutching Tom's hand, both of us too scared to talk. Sarah made phone calls. The police said they'd found Dad's wallet and his ring. They didn't say much else. We were taken to the hospital that night. The air smelled like disinfectant and rain. Mom sat motionless in the waiting room, her eyes fixed on the floor. Sarah spoke to the officers, nodding slowly, her hand on Mom's shoulder. When they finally told us Dad didn't make it, I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, staring at the white tiles, waiting for someone to say it was a mistake. But no one did. Mom's cry broke the silence, a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't just pain. It was like something inside her had snapped. Tom was only 12. He clung to me, sobbing, and all I could do was hold him. The funeral came a week later. It rained that day too. The whole town showed up, friends, neighbors, workers from Dad's company. Everyone said the same things, he was such a good man. He didn't deserve this. So sudden. I stood by the casket, staring at the polished wood, trying to remember the last words he said to me. "You always take care of your old man." It didn't seem real that I'd never hear his voice again. Mom could barely stand. Sarah stayed by her side, holding her arm, whispering comfort. People thanked Sarah for being so strong. They said she was a rock for our family. And she was. She handled the calls, the food deliveries, even helped plan the service when Mom couldn't focus. At the cemetery, as they lowered the casket, I finally broke. I cried so hard my vision blurred. Sarah wrapped her arms around me. Her voice was soft but steady. "Your dad loved you so much, Hannah. He'd want you to be strong." I wanted to believe her. But even as I leaned into her, something inside me felt wrong. After the funeral, people started to drift away. Life moved on, at least, for everyone else. For us, it just stopped. Mom barely left her room for days. She'd sit by the window, staring at the empty driveway. Sometimes I'd hear her talking softly, like she was speaking to Dad. Aunt Sarah came every day, cooking, cleaning, driving Tom to school. She'd say, "Linda needs time," and I guess she did. But soon, it felt like Sarah was running the whole house. She answered the phone. She handled Dad's business papers. Even the mail started going to her address, for safety. Some relatives noticed. Grandma once whispered to me at dinner, "Your aunt's taking charge, isn't she?" I didn't know what to say. It wasn't bad exactly, but it was strange. When Mom did come downstairs, she moved like a shadow. Quiet. Distant. One night, I overheard Sarah on the phone in Dad's study. Her voice was low, serious. I couldn't make out much, but I caught one line that made my chest tighten. "I told you we'd keep this between us." When she noticed me in the doorway, she smiled too quickly. "Oh. Just handling some old files, sweetheart. Go on to bed." I did what I always did back then, I ignored the uneasy feeling in my stomach. Weeks turned into months. Dad's photo hung above the fireplace. Sarah started helping with his company, to keep it going. People said she was amazing, stepping up when they needed her most. But the more she helped, the smaller Mom seemed to become. Sometimes I caught Mom looking at Sarah with a strange mix of sadness and something else, anger, maybe. One afternoon, I came home early from work and found them arguing in the kitchen. Mom's voice was shaking. "I trusted you, Sarah." "You said," Sarah cut her off sharply. "Not now. Not in front of Hannah." When I walked in, both went silent. Mom wiped her eyes. Sarah forced a smile. "Just some paperwork confusion," she said. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times Sarah had been there. All the times Dad had said he was working late. And that's when I decided to go through his old things. His study was still the same, the smell of coffee, the papers stacked neatly, his pen still sitting beside a half-finished crossword. I sat in his chair and opened the bottom drawer where he used to keep important files. Most of it was bills, business contracts, bank letters. But then, at the back, under a pile of receipts, I found something that didn't belong there, a small white envelope. It was sealed. The handwriting stopped me cold. On the front, in Dad's clear, careful writing, it said, "Sarah, Knight of 199X." My hand started to shake. I sat there for a long time, just staring at it, trying to figure out what it meant. Why would Dad write something to Sarah? Why was it hidden? I thought about putting it back, pretending I never saw it. But curiosity won. I slid a finger under the flap and opened it just enough to peek inside. There was a single note, folded neatly. The paper looked old, yellow at the edges. On it, I could read only one line before I froze completely. "Thank you for being there. I couldn't have done it without you." And at the bottom, Dad's signature. Real. Familiar. Final. I stared at those words, my heart pounding so loud I could barely breathe. What couldn't he have done without her? What happened that night? I didn't have answers, only that sinking feeling that everything I believed about my father, about my aunt, about our family, might not be what it seemed. When I slid the envelope fully open, I froze. Dad's signature. Aunt Sarah's name. And something I didn't understand yet. After I found that envelope, I couldn't think about anything else. It was like the words burned into my head. "Thank you for being there. I couldn't have done it without you." At first, I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe it was about some business deal. Maybe Dad had just been thanking Aunt Sarah for helping him with work or something. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Things started to feel strange around the house. Mom and Aunt Sarah still talked every day, but now their voices got quieter when I walked into the room. Sometimes I'd hear them in the kitchen, whispering fast, and then everything would stop the moment I appeared. Tom didn't notice much. He was still in college, always out with friends, and I didn't want to drag him into whatever this was. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One morning, I saw Aunt Sarah getting into Dad's old car, the same one the police said had been wrecked the night he died. I froze. It was supposed to be gone. Totaled. I walked over and asked, "Why are you driving Dad's car?" I thought it was destroyed. She hesitated for just a second, then smiled too quickly. "Oh, no, honey. This is just the same model. I bought it years later." Brings back memories, doesn't it? But when she drove away, I noticed a small dent on the back bumper, the same dent I remembered from when Dad accidentally backed into the mailbox once. My heart started racing. That night, I asked Mom about it. "Why does Aunt Sarah have Dad's car?" She didn't look up from the sink. "It's not his." "Please, Hannah. Don't start this again." "Start what?" "I'm just asking questions." She sighed. "It's too painful to talk about. Let it go." "But Mom," I pressed, "why didn't we ever see Dad's body clearly? The coffin was closed. The police never really told us what happened that night. Doesn't that bother you?" Her hand started shaking. "Stop it, Hannah. You don't understand. It's better this way." "Better than what?" "Knowing the truth." Her eyes filled with tears. "Please. Drop it." Then she walked out of the room, leaving me there with more questions than answers. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice, that shaky tone, like she was scared of something. A few days later, I found her crying in Dad's study. Her head was buried in her hands. Aunt Sarah stood beside her, whispering, "You did what you had to do, Linda. She doesn't need to know everything." I stepped into the doorway. Who doesn't need to know what? They both froze. Aunt Sarah turned around slowly, her face pale. "Hannah, sweetie, you shouldn't be listening." Mom stood up too fast, wiping her face. "It's nothing, honey. We were just remembering things." "Remembering what?" I asked. My voice came out sharper than I meant. "Because it sure sounds like you're hiding something." Aunt Sarah looked at Mom. "Linda." Mom cut her off. "Not now." I stared at both of them. "You're lying to me." Both of you. Nobody said a word. Aunt Sarah grabbed her purse and left the room. Mom just stood there, trembling. Why? I asked quietly. Why did you let us believe Dad was dead? What are you hiding? She didn't answer. Her eyes filled again, and she turned away. That silence felt heavier than any words. The next night, we all sat at dinner, Mom, Tom, Aunt Sarah, and me. Nobody talked. Forks scraped plates. The air felt like glass, sharp and fragile. Tom finally tried to lighten the mood. So, anyone see that new movie? Nobody replied. Aunt Sarah pushed her food around her plate and said she wasn't feeling well. Mom nodded and stood up to clear the dishes before even finishing her meal. I looked at Tom, and he just shrugged, confused. After dinner, I went back into Dad's study. I didn't even know what I was looking for, maybe another clue, maybe something that made sense. I turned on his old laptop. It took forever to start, but when it did, I started going through his emails. Most were boring, business stuff, church newsletters. Then I saw a folder named Personal. Inside were dozens of emails. The sender, Sarah M. The first one was from a few months before his death. It said, "We can't keep meeting like this. Linda is starting to notice." Another one. "You promised this would all be over soon. I don't know if I can keep pretending." And one more, a few weeks before that accident. "Everything's ready for that night. Just make sure no one sees you leave." My stomach dropped. I scrolled down to Dad's replies. "Trust me, Sarah. This is the only way. They'll be safe once it's done." Safe? From what? I didn't understand. My hands were shaking as I kept reading. Then I found a bank statement on the desktop, a transfer of $25,000 from Dad's account to Aunt Sarah's name, just 3 months before his death. That's when everything started to spin. I leaned back in the chair, trying to catch my breath. My dad had been giving Sarah money. They were writing secret emails. And somehow, his death was part of whatever they were planning. I thought about going straight to Mom, but I already knew what she'd say. It's too painful. So instead, I decided to find out on my own. That night, I drove to Aunt Sarah's house. Her lights were still on. I parked down the street and sat there in the dark, heart pounding. I needed to see for myself what she was hiding. I crept up to her window, the one near the side porch where she always talked on the phone. The curtains were half open. She was standing there, pacing, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, but I could still make out some words through the crack in the window. "No, she's asking questions now. Too many. I told Linda we couldn't keep this forever. If she ever finds out the truth about that night, it will ruin everything." I covered my mouth to keep from gasping. My chest felt tight. My knees almost gave out. She ended the call and stood still for a long time, staring at something I couldn't see, maybe a photo on the wall, maybe her own reflection. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "We should have told her the truth years ago." I ran back to my car before she could see me. The whole drive home, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. If I'd had any doubt before, it was gone now. Something happened that night, something big, something they'd both been hiding for 20 years. And whatever it was, my father's death wasn't what it seemed. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding. Aunt Sarah's words echoed in my mind. If she ever finds out the truth about that night, it will ruin everything. I knew then, I was going to find out what really happened. No matter what it cost. The next morning, I didn't wait for anyone. I drove straight to Aunt Sarah's house. My hands were cold on the steering wheel the whole way there. I didn't even have a plan, I just knew I couldn't keep quiet anymore. She opened the door before I even knocked twice. Her eyes were red, like she hadn't slept. For a second, she just looked at me. Then she stepped aside and said softly, "Come in, Hannah." The house felt too quiet. The smell of coffee hung in the air, and the curtains were half closed. On the table were photo frames, one of her and Dad at some family picnic years ago. They looked happy, too happy. I sat down, clutching the envelope I'd found weeks ago. "I know you're hiding something," I said. "Please. Just tell me the truth." She didn't deny it. She just sank into the chair across from me, her hands shaking. After a long pause, she said quietly, "I was there, when your father died." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean, you were there?" Her eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't supposed to happen the way it did." I didn't speak. I couldn't. She took a deep breath. "Your father and we were trying to fix something. He was involved in something that got out of hand. He trusted the wrong people. He thought faking his death was the only way to protect all of you." I blinked hard. "Wait, what? Are you saying Dad faked his death?" She nodded slowly. "That was the plan. But something went wrong that night. He met with someone at the old dock. There was an argument. He fell, hit his head. I tried to help, but it was too late. He wasn't breathing. The room spun. So you just let everyone believe he died in that car crash?" She wiped her eyes. "He asked me to. Before he left that night, he told me, if anything happens, make sure they think it was quick. He didn't want you or Tom to see him hurt. He wanted to leave peace behind." My throat felt tight. I looked down at the envelope in my hand, the one that said Sarah, Night of 199X. "I read part of it," I said. "But not all of it." I opened it slowly. My hands trembled. Inside was another folded paper. It said, "Your silence means everything. He owed me. You'll understand someday why this can't reach them. Thank you for being there when I couldn't be." I stared at it. My chest hurt. "What does that mean? He owed me? What did he owe you?" Aunt Sarah closed her eyes. "He promised to protect me years ago. I made a mistake, a big one, that could have destroyed my life and your mother's. He covered it up. That's what the money was for. He thought he was fixing things. But it just tied us together in lies." My voice shook. "Mom knew?" She nodded. "Eventually, yes. I told her the night it happened. We made the decision together to keep it quiet. She hated him for it, but she didn't want to break you and Tom." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "So all those years," I said, "you both looked me in the eye and let me think he just died suddenly. That he was gone." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "We thought it was Kinder." "Kinder?" I almost shouted. "You took away my chance to say goodbye. You made me grieve someone under false lies." She started crying harder. I know, Hannah. You have every right to hate me. But your father was already gone in every way that mattered. That night. I tried to call for help, but he made me promise. He said, no hospitals, no police. Just let it end." I felt dizzy. My mind raced back to that night, the flashing lights outside, Mom fainting, and Sarah on the phone saying, "We'll keep this quiet." Now it all made sense. He was still alive, wasn't he? I whispered. She didn't answer right away. Then she said quietly, for a few minutes, "Yes." I buried my face in my hands. My body shook with quiet sobs. I could almost smell it, the sharp, sterile scent of hospital rooms. I remembered the sound of monitors beeping, the flash of lights when the ambulance came. Back then I thought they were saving him. But now I knew, there had been nothing to save. "He didn't want you to see him like that," Aunt Sarah whispered. "He wanted your last memory of him to be happy. That's why we told the story of the crash. He made me promise to protect you from the truth." I looked up at her. "And Mom just went along with it?" "She couldn't handle it," Sarah said. "She blamed him for everything, for the lies, for the money, for trusting me. She said if people knew the truth, it would destroy what little was left of your family." At that moment, Mom's voice came from the doorway. "It would have," she said softly. I turned around. Mom stood there, pale and quiet. I hadn't even heard her come in. "I hated him for what he did," she said, her voice breaking. "And I hated myself for helping cover it up. But I did it because I couldn't let you see how broken I was. You were just a kid. You and Tom needed to feel safe." I stood up, tears blurring my eyes. "Safe? You call living a lie safe?" She looked down. "It was the only way we knew how to survive." Silence filled the room. The sound of the old clock ticking felt louder than anything. Finally, I whispered, so that's what he meant in that note. Your silence means everything. He was talking about the secret. Aunt Sarah nodded. He wanted peace, even if it meant lies. I stared at both of them, the two people I'd trusted most. The people who'd built my whole world. It turned out, I said slowly, my voice shaking, the person I trusted most, my father, was part of the secret. And the person I loved as an aunt had been protecting a secret I wasn't allowed to know. Nobody spoke. Mom reached for my hand, but I stepped back. The room felt smaller, heavier. My mind kept replaying that night, Dad walking out the door, Mom's tears, Aunt Sarah's whisper, we'll keep this quiet. It wasn't just a night of loss. It was the night my whole life turned into a lie. When I finally walked out of that house, the air felt cold against my face. Everything I thought I knew about my family had cracked open. It turns out, the night my father died wasn't the end of a story, it was the beginning of a lie I lived. After that day, nothing in our house felt the same again. The truth had cracked something open that couldn't be fixed. It was like someone had thrown a stone through a window, and even though we swept up the glass, the air still felt cold coming through the hole. Aunt Sarah stopped coming around as much. When she did, she barely spoke. Mom spent most of her days in bed, staring at the ceiling. And Tom wouldn't even look at anyone. I tried to keep busy, to act normal, but everything I touched reminded me of what I'd learned. The kitchen table where we once laughed at dinner. The photo on the wall of Dad holding me on his shoulders. The study door that had always been locked. That door felt different now, heavier. One night, I found myself standing in front of it, holding the envelope and the printed emails I'd found. My hands were shaking. Inside, I could hear voices, Mom, Aunt Sarah, and Dad. Yes, Dad. He was back. After all these years, after the lies, he was here, sitting in the living room like nothing had happened. I pushed the door open. Everyone turned to look at me. The air in the room froze. I held up the envelope and papers. You lied to me, I said. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. You made me believe he was gone for nothing. No one spoke. Aunt Sarah looked down at the floor. Mom wiped her eyes. Dad stayed seated, staring at the ground, his hands folded tight. I had to protect you, Aunt Sarah whispered finally. Protect me? I said, my voice rising. From what? The truth? You didn't protect me. You broke me. Dad still didn't look up. Tom, who had been standing by the door, suddenly shouted, You're all sick. Then he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. No one went after him. For a long time, we sat in silence. The only sound was the ticking of the clock and the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Finally, Dad spoke. His voice was low, tired. I thought disappearing would make things easier for everyone. I stared at him. Easier? You made us grieve you. You made Mom lose her mind. You made me live a lie. He didn't answer. He just looked at the wall. Aunt Sarah tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. Later that week, things got worse. Word spread through town. Someone must have talked, maybe one of Dad's old business partners. They showed up one evening, knocking on the door. I watched from the stairs as they confronted him in the hallway. One of them shouted, You think you can just disappear and walk back in like nothing happened? We lost everything because of you. Dad didn't fight back. He just said, I'm sorry. They left, slamming the door. By morning, it was all over town. People whispered at the market. Neighbors stopped waving. Aunt Sarah called a family meeting at her house. She said we needed to clear the air. But no one wanted to go. When we finally did, the living room was packed, cousins, uncles, even people I hadn't seen in years. Everyone looked tense. Aunt Sarah stood in front of them, her hands clasped together. I made mistakes, she said. I thought I was protecting this family, but I see now I only made things worse. Uncle Ben spoke up from the back. You lied to us for years, Sarah. You made us bury a man who wasn't even dead. Dad sat in the corner, silent, his face pale. Mom broke down crying. She tried to speak but couldn't. Her hands shook so badly that Aunt Sarah had to help her sit down. Then everything fell apart. People started shouting. Someone called Dad a coward. Another said Aunt Sarah should step down from the community board. She nodded quietly. I already did, she said. Nobody clapped. Nobody comforted her. That night, Dad's business license was suspended. His old company didn't want to be associated with him anymore. The papers ran small stories with headlines like, "Man returns from the dead, family deception uncovered." Mom ended up in the hospital a few days later. The doctor said it was stress, but I think it was heartbreak. Tom refused to visit. He wouldn't even answer my messages. He said he didn't have a sister, an aunt, or a father anymore. The house became quiet again, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air itself is sad. At night, I lay awake listening to the creak of the walls, the sound of the clock, and sometimes the faint cry of an owl outside. The house felt empty, like the life had drained out of it. Dad stayed in the study most of the time. The same room that had been locked for years. Sometimes I'd walk past and see the light under the door. I never went in. I didn't want to know what he was doing. The church bells at dawn made me flinch every morning. They reminded me of the funeral, the fake funeral, where I had cried until I couldn't breathe. Now I wondered how I didn't see the signs back then. How could I have ignored the way Mom avoided talking about that night? How could I have missed the strange looks between her and Aunt Sarah? I asked myself over and over, why did I trust them? Why did I believe everything they said? The truth was, I wanted to believe. I wanted to think our family was strong, even when it wasn't. Weeks passed. People stopped visiting. Calls went unanswered. Aunt Sarah stopped coming by completely. Sometimes I caught Dad standing outside, looking at the sky like he was waiting for something, maybe forgiveness. But none of us had any left to give. I began to spend time in my childhood room again. The posters on the walls looked faded. The photos on my desk were covered in dust. Everything looked smaller, duller, like time had shrunk it. I stood by the door one evening, looking around. The air smelled like old books and rain. That room had once felt safe, a place where I dreamed about growing up, about family, about love that never breaks. Now I knew better. Family wasn't just blood. It wasn't about who shared your name or who smiled in old photos. It was about who stood beside you when everything fell apart. And as I stood there by the door of my childhood room, I realized, sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about who stands when the truth breaks you. It took weeks before the dust even began to settle. By then, the whole town knew about what happened. The papers had written their stories. The neighbors had whispered enough times. And our family, what was left of it, sat in the middle of all that noise, trying to figure out what came next. At first, it was the investigators. They came with folders, cameras, and serious faces. They asked 100 questions about Dad's business, about money, about the night he died. They looked through files, papers, and accounts that had been closed for years. They found things we didn't even know existed, bank records, secret deals, fake names. Aunt Sarah had to go in for questioning. So did Mom. They said it was just procedure, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like the past was dragging us all back to the scene we tried so hard to forget. I sat in the waiting area while they talked to the investigators. The clock ticked loudly. The air felt cold. When Aunt Sarah finally came out, she looked smaller, weaker. She didn't speak to anyone. Later, I heard her whisper to Mom, "I never wanted it to go this far." Mom nodded, eyes red. None of us did. The government reopened Dad's estate. That meant they treated him as if he had really been alive all this time, and that changed everything: the bank accounts, the house, the ownership papers. Cousins and uncles started asking questions about inheritance and property. It turned messy fast. Some of them even filed legal papers. They said they wanted justice, but really, I think they just wanted closure. Through it all, I tried to stay calm. I had cried enough. I had shouted enough. I had spent too many nights staring at the ceiling, wishing things were different. This time, I chose to breathe instead of break. I told myself, I will decide who I want in my life. So, I made a list. At the top, I wrote, boundaries. Mom and I started therapy together. At first, it was awkward. We sat in silence while the counselor asked gentle questions. But after a few weeks, Mom began to open up. She said she had felt trapped between truth and fear. She said she was sorry for choosing silence. Aunt Sarah started therapy too, alone. I didn't join her. I wasn't ready for that yet. I began my own counseling sessions. My therapist was kind and soft-spoken. She told me, "You don't have to carry their choices anymore." That stuck with me. She helped me understand that love doesn't mean accepting lies, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Slowly, I began to heal. I joined a small support group in town for people who grew up in families that kept big secrets. There were others like me, people who had been lied to, people who lost trust in those they loved most. Listening to their stories helped me feel less alone. One girl said, "Sometimes you spend your whole life protecting people who would have let you break just to hide their truth." And I nodded, because I knew exactly what that felt like. With time, I started writing about my story on a small blog. I didn't use real names. I just wrote about the feelings, about betrayal, forgiveness, and rebuilding. To my surprise, people read it. Some even reached out to say, "Thank you. That's my story too." That was the first time I realized something good could come out of something so painful. I also started reconnecting with friends I had lost touch with. Friends from school. Friends who had stopped calling after Dad's death. I explained what happened, not every detail, just enough. They didn't judge. They just listened. For the first time in years, I felt seen again. I stopped being the daughter of the man who died. Now, I was Hannah, just Hannah. Months later, I went back to the cemetery. The grave was still there, the one that had Dad's name carved on it, even though his body was never inside. The grass around it had grown tall, and the stone looked worn. I stood there for a long time, not sure what to say. Then I spoke quietly, "I forgive you. Not for you, but for me, so I can move on." The wind was soft that day. I took the old envelope, the one that had caused me so much pain, and placed it in a small metal box. I didn't bury it. I just closed the lid and kept it safe, like a chapter one was done rereading. That night, I felt lighter. A few weeks later, I signed up to volunteer at a local nonprofit that worked with kids who came from families with hidden trauma. Some of them didn't even know their full stories yet. We created a program together called Truth Before Secrets. It became a small project at first, just a few meetings and open talks. But soon, more people joined. We held small workshops for siblings who were dealing with family lies. We helped them learn how to talk, how to ask questions, how to stand up for themselves kindly. Every time I saw a child smile after sharing something hard, I felt a little bit more of myself coming back. It wasn't about fixing the past anymore. It was about making sure others didn't have to grow up confused like I did. Mom sometimes came to those meetings. She didn't talk, but she listened. And that was enough. Aunt Sarah never attended. But one day, she sent me a letter. It said, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you build a better truth than the one we gave you." I cried reading that. Not out of anger, but out of peace. Time moved on. The investigation ended. People stopped talking. The house was quieter again, but this time, it wasn't an empty kind of quiet. It was calm. Tom eventually came home. He didn't say much, but one morning he sat beside me at breakfast and asked, "Do you still go to those group meetings?" "Yeah," I said. "You should come." He nodded. Maybe. That, maybe, was enough for me. Months later, I still walked by the study door every morning. The same door that used to make me feel afraid. Now, I paused there sometimes, not because I was looking for more answers, but because it reminded me how far I'd come. That room once held secrets. Now, it held silence. And I had learned that silence isn't always bad, sometimes it means peace. So when I walk past it now, I smile. Not because I've forgotten what happened, but because I'm still here. Still standing. Still healing. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not walking through life as someone's broken daughter. I'm just Hannah, the woman who finally chose truth over silence. And as I close that door gently behind me each morning, I remind myself. I don't walk by it to seek answers anymore. I walk by it because I'm reclaiming my life. Sometimes I sit in my room and think about everything that happened, all the lies, all the secrets, all the silence that filled our home. And every time I think about it, one thing becomes clearer: the truth doesn't destroy families, lies do. For years, I thought keeping quiet meant keeping peace. That's what adults taught me growing up: don't ask too many questions, don't stir the past, don't make people uncomfortable. But now I know, that kind of silence doesn't protect anyone. It just builds walls that love can't climb. When people say they're protecting you by hiding the truth, what they really mean is they're protecting themselves. I used to think my aunt was being loyal. I used to think my mom was just scared. But now I understand: what looks like loyalty can hide betrayal, and what looks like protection can be another lie. For a long time, I told myself that asking questions was wrong. That if I just stayed quiet, things would get better. But they didn't. Staying silent almost broke me. Asking questions, even the hard ones, that's what saved me. I remember the day I found out my father's death wasn't what I thought it was. That day, my whole world turned upside down. I thought I had lost him once, but in that moment, I lost him all over again, this time to the truth. I used to picture that night over and over again. The sound of the phone ringing, Mom's scream, the flashing lights, the way Aunt Sarah held my brother close. It felt like the end of our story. But it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a lie that stretched across years. Now, when I look back, I can see all the small signs I ignored. The late-night whispers. The missing papers. The way Aunt Sarah's eyes would dart away when someone mentioned Dad's name. I never thought hearing the death bell for my father would turn into a lifetime of questions. One day I believed I knew my family. I believed love meant trust. Then my aunt confessed. And that's when I realized I'd been living someone else's story all along. The hardest part wasn't learning what happened. It was learning how much of my life had been built on someone else's version of the truth. I grew up thinking honesty was dangerous, that digging into the past would hurt people. But now I know the real danger is pretending not to see what's in front of you. I've learned that you can love someone and still need distance. You can forgive someone and still not trust them. And that's okay. People think family is unbreakable, but the truth is, family is fragile when it's built on secrets. Every lie adds a crack. Every silence widens the gap. Until one day, the love you thought was strong just falls apart under the weight of what was never said. When I finally faced Mom and Aunt Sarah, it wasn't anger that came out of me, it was sadness. Sadness for all the years we could have spent being honest. Sadness for the version of my dad I thought I knew. Sadness for the girl I used to be, who believed that if she behaved, if she smiled, if she stayed quiet, everything would be okay. But things don't get better by pretending. They get better when you face the truth, even when it hurts. So if I've learned anything, it's this: you deserve the truth. You deserve to ask. You deserve to set boundaries. Even when you love them. Because love without truth is a house built on sand. It looks steady for a while, but eventually, it collapses. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have looked like if no one had confessed. Maybe I would still be living peacefully, thinking Dad was gone forever, never questioning anything. But that kind of peace isn't real. It's a dream made out of lies. And dreams like that always end. Now, I find peace in something different, in honesty. In knowing the full story, no matter how painful it is. Because even though the truth hurt me, it also set me free. It taught me that family love should never require silence. That forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. That sometimes, protecting yourself means stepping back from the people who taught you to stay small. The truth made me stronger, not weaker. It helped me see that my life isn't defined by what they did, it's defined by what I choose to do next. There's one thing I hold on to now: I don't run from questions anymore. I ask them. And I listen to the quiet answers that follow. Because sometimes the quietest truths are the ones that change everything. When people tell stories about the night someone died, I can't help but listen differently now. Because I've learned that sometimes, what's buried isn't a body, it's the truth. And the truth never stays buried forever. So next time you hear a story about someone's final night, remember this: sometimes the darkest secrets are kept in silent rooms, behind closed doors. Ask the quiet questions. Look where others don't. Because uncovering the truth might be your only way back to yourself. I used to wish I could go back to that night and stop everything from happening. But now, I don't wish that anymore. Because even though it broke me, it also rebuilt me. Now I know who I am without the lies. I know what peace feels like when it's honest. And I know that truth, no matter how painful, is always better than pretending. So if you were in my place, standing there with the envelope that changed everything, what would you do? Would you stay and fight for the truth? Or would you walk away forever?